Breaking news from the James Bond franchise. Danny Boyle, the filmmaker known for movies like Trainspotting, 127 Hours, and Slumdog Millionaire, who was slated to direct the 25th James Bond movie going into production later this year, has parted ways with the film. From a tweet this morning on the James Bond 007 official account, Michael G. Wilson, Barbara Broccoli, and Daniel Craig today announced that due to creative differences, Danny Boyle has decided to no longer direct Bond 25. Danny Boyle was also heavily involved in the writing process and stressed that the script's creative merits were key into whether or not they moved forward. Regardless, this sucks. That's all I can.
Yeah, to put it lightly.
This was a shock. I just woken up. I was scrolling through Twitter. I saw this and my heart sank. I think Danny Boyle is such a perfect fit for Bond, and he's such an auteur filmmaker, and this would have been really his first big blockbuster. I didn't expect it to go wrong because he is such a prolific filmmaker. There isn't even much information out there as to why he parted ways. It just showed up on Twitter. It wasn't reported through the trades. There was no exclusive or heads up that there was dissent within the Bond franchise. Yet here we are. Yet another director bites the dust.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're probably going to learn more in the coming weeks. You know, stuff is going to come out about possibly what went wrong, what said creative differences were. But yeah, I mean, I'm just as shocked as you, Adam. I think I speak for all the Bond fans out there when I say that when Danny Boyle came on board, it just felt like a right choice. You know, this is a director who is a huge James Bond fan himself. He's done quasi work for the franchise in the past. He directed something for the London Olympics starring James Bond back when those were going on. You know, like this just felt like the correct decision, and to see it go wrong, it just for me personally, it does not bode well for a franchise where I was not that pleased with the last installment, and I'm kind of hoping the next one will be better. So it also makes me nervous for that. I'm suddenly calling into question whether or not they can stick the landing with specifically with the Daniel Craig movies, because this is supposed to be his last movie as well.
Yeah, and I was going to mention Daniel Craig after Spectre it was very unclear whether he wanted to come back, whether he was going to come back, even though Spectre made a lot of money. At the time, he was interviewed, and he said he would rather slash his wrists than do another James Bond movie. And then a year later, something changed his mind, maybe some time off.
A lot of money.
Yeah, I mean...
a lot of money, I bet you.
Skyfall made over $1 billion. I think Spectre made some like $880 million. For me, just bringing a personal opinion, I thought Spectre was a creative disaster. Just by chance, I rewatched the movie a few days ago, purely by coincidence, because it was free on Amazon, and I just needed to, kill my brain for a couple hours and recover from life. And I thought,
that'll do it.
Yeah, well, I just thought, let me give it another try, because I loved Skyfall so much. I found out Hoyte van Hoytema shot Spectre, and I loved the cinematography, and I thought, okay, come in 3 years later with a blank slate. You know me, Jackson. I'm usually nice, even in movies I don't like. I don't want to be nice to this movie. It's just so little about it works, and it was supposed to be an amalgamation of everything good about Daniel Craig as Bond, and instead it was just a meandering, depressive, disjointed misadventure that, like I think Honest Trailer said, how do you make James Bond versus the Illuminati boring? How can you possibly mess that up? And, again, to bring this back to Bond 25, the Sony leaks that happened in 2014 highlighted a lot of the dissent behind the scenes and the script issues as Spectre was rushing towards the production date, and they didn't have a script, and they had a very bad script, and then they rewrote it to probably make an even worse one because all the executives like Barbara Broccoli, who's very involved, very hands-on, they were panicked, and after the success of Skyfall, they wanted something good, and they just completely botched it.
Yeah, well, I feel like it has been a minute since I've seen Spectre, and we're not reviewing Spectre on this discussion specifically, but it was interesting. You got to the end of that movie, and there was this profoundly unsatisfying feeling, at least for me, just like, really, that was the end of that movie? Like, Blofeld gets arrested, and he lives happily ever after with his girlfriend. Like, what? Like, it felt like such a bizarre way to end a James Bond movie. And my theory, and I don't know if I'll be right or not, and I guess I'll have to find out next year, but my theory is that they're kind of sort of remaking On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and they might be sort of setting up that, Blofeld to come back and have this revenge on James Bond, and that's sort of like what the next movie is, which might be interesting. It wouldn't be a particularly original direction to take the franchise, but that if that's what they're setting it up for, like, fine, at least they were setting it up for something. But with all the drama with Danny Boyle and, all these script rewrites and creative differences, it makes me feel like they're not quite sure where they want to take this franchise from here. And that's disheartening to me. But at the same time, it's also kind of encouraging, because what's great about the James Bond franchise is that you always sort of have the option of a blank slate. Like, if something isn't working, you can always just kind of like restart it with another guy and you'll get the same audience. And this is technically supposed to be Daniel Craig's last movie. So at least we can all rest comfortably knowing that if it turns out terribly, we'll get a great one with Idris Elba in about 4 years.
Well, like, I after watching Spectre, I felt the same way I felt after watching Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, in the sense that this can't be the end. Like, because Harrison Ford had a 4-movie run with Indiana Jones, and to retire the character at the end of Crystal Skull would just be a massive disservice to the character and the franchise as one consistent story. In the same sense, I think it's fair to say we all got attached to Daniel Craig. Like, Casino Royale was a huge hit at the time. Daniel Craig was a risky choice that really paid off. And by the time we got to Skyfall, it had just reached this culturally visible and beloved status. At least that movie did. I mean, even the box office alone, a James Bond movie making over $1 billion, like, it's great. And so in that sense, like, I was very happy to see Daniel Craig announced that he wouldn't be slashing his wrist and he would come back for one more time. And I thought, this is great, let's get closure. And then when they announced Danny Boyle, I thought, who better than to give us the best last Daniel Craig movie, James Bond movie, than Danny Boyle. And I don't know. I'd love to hear the inside story. We're recording this just a couple hours after the news broke. I'm sure in a couple days we will have more, Hollywood Reporter exclusives or Variety exclusives.
Hopefully in a couple of days we'll have a new director. I mean, they're supposed to go into production in December, so they better find somebody soon unless they push that release date back, which, knowing Sony and knowing the studios, they probably don't want to do.
So let's move into that part of the discussion then. Are they going to try to rush to meet the release date and still go into production in December? And who do you think is going to replace Danny Boyle?
That's a good question. I was going to ask that too. I mean, there had been whispers that Christopher Nolan might do it a while back. I don't think that's the best idea. I
just don't think it'll happen.
Yeah, and nor do I think it'll happen. I mean, Christopher Nolan is such a particular filmmaker. Yeah, sure, Danny Boyle isn't exactly a franchise filmmaker, but I feel like Danny Boyle is the kind of director who, you would bring in to take an interesting idea or an interesting script and add sort of a level of visual complexity and flair to it. Like him coming on to do Steve Jobs, like that was a really excellent decision. So, whereas like Christopher Nolan, Christopher Nolan doesn't really come on to projects. Everything that he does is kind of straight out of his own head. So him doing a Bond movie, I don't know if that would work necessarily. I mean, realistically, what's probably going to happen is they're probably going to do kind of what Star Wars did with the Han Solo movie. Like, they'll probably bring in a very solid workman-like director. I wouldn't be surprised to see them bring back Sam Mendes, just because, he did direct the 2 highest grossing installments in the franchise, and he probably has a great working relationship with everybody. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Who do you think? Who do you want to see?
I think Chris Nolan would be an interesting choice, but he there's no way he would hop into someone else's script and just go with it.
Exactly.
And from what I hear, Barbara Broccoli and the studio are very involved as producers creatively. Like, it's, there might be a scenario where Danny Boyle's absence isn't even much of a hiccup because there's such a drive behind this story that the producers and the studio are trying to tell, and Danny Boyle might have actually been restricted in that scenario, creatively and otherwise. They're probably going to get a workman-like director. Like you said, I just see them getting someone who's done 3 or 4 mediocre to okay studio movies. I mean, if Matthew Vaughn wasn't doing Kingsman, I think they'd get Matthew Vaughn to do it.
I don't know.
Well, I didn't say I wanted, I just said I think they would.
Well, I mean, Matthew Vaughn's a little, he's a little, just specifically for the Craig movies, like the Daniel Craig movies have been so visually grounded and sort of, and Matthew Vaughn's style is just a reaction against that. Like the Kingsman movies are very much meant to emulate the whole Roger Moore era of James Bond, which is about as far as you can get from Daniel Craig. I mean, that would certainly be a bold choice. I just don't think it's going to happen.
I think we might see a trend let me put it this way. I think Sam Mendes, if he doesn't have a project, might come back. Because money, they'll probably pay whoever can save this a lot of money and who can jump into
insane amount of money.
Jump into a script that's, they're going to go through, probably through some rewrites for this current script, but if they stick with the story, which I think they have to if they're still going to start shooting in December, they need someone who they know they can work well with, who has a proven track record, and who gets the tone of Bond. And like you said, who better than Sam Mendes, who directed the last 2 movies that were, for all intents and purposes, both successful. We'll probably see it in a couple days. I don't know. It's just, it's never fun to see this all play out so publicly, and especially it just causes concern. And as someone who had this such high anticipation for this movie, it feels like it's in peril, whether or not we actually know the specifics.
You know who my pipe dream would be, and I don't think this is going to happen, but you know who they should get, who'd be really cool? I think they should get Steve McQueen, because he's got. Yeah, because, you know, I mean, he obviously, like, very big prestige director, very popular British director. And, of course, you would need to be a British director to direct a James Bond movie. And he's also got Widows coming out later this year, which there's been a lot of hype for. So it wouldn't surprise me if they went with somebody like that. And he's sort of kind of, I mean, he's always been more of an art house filmmaker, but I feel like he's at the point where he's overdue for a big blockbuster franchise movie. And if there's anybody who could do something very striking and cool with a James Bond movie while still being true to the tone and aesthetic of the Daniel Craig ones, I think it would be Steve McQueen. That's who I would like to see. But again, I don't know. Probably not. Yeah.
I mean, Martin Campbell, who directed Casino Royale, is I think 73 years old or 74 now.
Yeah,
but
he's getting old.
Yeah, there's still a possibility
That's
for him
true.
to
They
come
could
back.
bring him back. That would be a little poetic, too, because he did start off the Craig era. So it would be fitting for him to end it. And he's still working. I mean, he did that Jackie Chan movie last year, The Foreigner, which I heard was pretty good. So it's not like he couldn't direct it. So that you're right. That might be a pretty good decision, too.
So let us know what you think about this situation in the comments sections, and also who you would like to see take the reins for this franchise and close out what is probably going to be the last Daniel Craig movie. I mean, my one worst case scenario fear is that Craig drops out himself in the next few days. It's a possibility. I don't know. The tweet made it sound like he's on board with the producers and he was kind of behind the decision to part with Danny Boyle, but like, fingers crossed, I just don't want this to get any worse.
We'll see. Yeah, we will see.
And in the meantime, if you liked our discussion and want to hang out with us some more, go check out our channel, Screen Fever, and subscribe for more discussions, podcasts, videos, essays, and short films. We'll see you next time.